Yeah, so we're ahead of ourselves. Well done, guys. Better slow down, we better give Jimmy something to do this afternoon.
Perhaps I could take the opportunity to deal with Councillor Jones's question about Severn, Mersey and Thames Street. If you look at map 25, you should all have a map book in front of you. You'll see that CA18 actually covers 2 of those streets, and that is, well, you should have been delivered this map book to you as well, and all of the papers that were sent to you, but I have an extra here. Yeah, so that's the character area as it stands at the moment.
Right.
Anita's not here.
Okay, thank you.
Gone for a cigarette break or something. And Ellen's called in, she's coming. Okay. We'll just start on the cigarette break,
So, thank you. You want to do your one first, don't you? Unfortunately, we've lost Anita, so the alarm's gone out to find Anita, and if you don't mind, then we'll move on to Chapter 21, Specific Purpose Zones. Right. And perhaps we could invite Andrew to give his first.
Since I've sat here. So
which one are you covering, Andrew?
Specific Purpose Wigram is the one that I'm talking to you about. Wigram.
So that's under Draft Chapter 21.
Yeah, 21.1. There aren't any changes since you saw it last. I assume you don't need an introduction to what Wigram is and does. So we can skip straight to questions if you'd like. No, specific purpose.
We've moved on to Chapter 21, Specific Purpose Zones. And Special Purpose Zone, Wigram. Yep. So it's about halfway down the list.
All right, so no changes from when we saw it last. Are there any questions on the no changes?
Okay, so it provides for some aircraft movements. It doesn't include the previous airfield or airstrip, but there is still a big grassy area where you can use helicopters, etc. And it also provides for the museum and bits and pieces around that. It doesn't, I guess, copy what was provided for in the resource consent for the convention centre, but that can continue because it has consent and existing use rights.
You happy, Vicky? Tim?
So with regards to this, and I'm sure the information's here, I just haven't got to it. So the Wigram Museum is also a function centre.
Yeah.
So that's covered within this as well. So noise levels.
Well, it's a bit of a grey area between what's museum and associated with the museum and what's the convention centre. But between the resource consent and these rules, they're both provided for.
Okay. There haven't been any issues that I'm aware of.
No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, no. Thanks.
Raf?
Just a quick one on the port.
No, we're just doing Wigram first. We're sorry we have different chapter leaders for different chapters. Any more on Wigram? Okay. So we'll move on to the golf resort with Glenda. Sorry. This is looking at specific purpose zone golf resort.
I don't have anything to add to earlier presentations about this. Do you have any questions?
Any questions on the golf?
Are you talking about the Christchurch Golf Resort at Spencerville? No, they haven't. There's nothing on the ground at all. I suspect the developer's lost his financial backing.
So how long do we let people have land rezoned for the purpose of doing nothing? Do we have like a time frame? So it was quite a controversial rezoning, and it got rezoned. It was going to be great for the city and rah rah rah. But if nothing's happening there, you kind of wonder whether actually it's better to rezone it something else and
Well,
enable.
clearly, yeah, there was an option to let it lapse back to rural
Yeah.
zoning, and really the only reason that we've retained it at this stage is because that zone didn't become operative until 2011, so it's sort of a little bit more recent than some such zones, but I guess further down the track we could delete it.
Yes, there is. Yeah, there are.
Well, there was the development proposed under the zone, which is actually a bit like sort of Clearwater Mark II. It's this sort of similar concept, but more residential units and more apartments, on a slightly smaller site.
Coast, it's natural hazards, but is that land actually suitable for intensive residential?
I would probably have my own personal doubts about it, especially post-earthquake. I think that there probably are significant geotechnical issues there that weren't necessarily fully worked through during the process of that plan change.
But the natural hazards chapter will deal with that. That's not dealt with as part of the specific purpose zoning.
Yeah.
So the natural hazard chapter will deal with overlays over zones that are appropriate.
Even if they get certificate of existing use?
They wouldn't be able to get that because there's nothing there. But in terms of their proposals, they would need various consents/management plans to be put through council, so it can't actually happen as of right.
So you're confident we have enough robustness in that?
I think that we will have, because as a result of particularly our recent natural hazards chapter amendments, we've got several geotechnical assessments. It just depends on where you're at in the process. There'll be geotech assessments prior to the kind of, going ahead. There will definitely be a geotech assessment for any land use consents needed, and for buildings, we already do geotech assessment for building consents.
Right. Pauline, did you have a question on this?
And it's about the the toxicity that the chemicals they use on golf courses, and because that's so low lying and so close to the Styx and Brooklands Lagoon, would that be dealt with in the management plan, or what area would that be dealt with in?
Sorry, I didn't catch the actual term. Did you say toxicity?
Yeah, the toxins that are produced from the chemicals they use on golf courses.
Oh, do you mean
And the threat to the waterways there. So-
weedicides and sort of things
Yes,
like that? No, that's probably, it's a sort of a general question that relates both to sort of council's global stormwater discharge consents and to ECAN's responsibilities for water quality in the Styx River, etc. So it'll be kind of, I don't know whether they'll need a consent for that. It's very possible that they would need further ECAN consents for various aspects of the development, though, in regard to water and discharge of contaminants.
Okay, so that will come through the consent.
Right. Brigitte, are you wanting us to sign off each
I
one
think that's
within
best,
this?
yes, if
So
you don't mind.
I don't think from memory we've actually signed off the Wigram one, or have we?
Right. And again, the terminology should include "and associated Section 32 report."
So you would prefer that we go through each of the subcategories under the specific
Yes,
purpose
please.
zones and sign them off as opposed to
Yes.
one blanket one at the
Yes,
end?
please.
Okay. Well, with respect to Wigram, I think if you just pop up there a little bit, I don't think we had a mover and seconder, or we didn't carry the...
The Wigram one.
Okay, so move Tim. Andrew, you happy to second? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
And I just bring to your notice, of course, it needs to include Section 32 for all of them as well.
Yep. And we've also done
Golf
the
course.
golf resorts
Golf resource.
here. So I'll move that. Tim isn't listening, so maybe Paul will second it. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Thank
Right.
you. So now we'll just move on to tertiary education and schools, both specific purpose zones, and Glenda will deal with those as well.
Again, I don't have anything really to add to my earlier presentation, but I'm obviously happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on the schools? Oh, sorry, we're doing tertiary, aren't we?
That's tertiary education one.
That's-
Does
right, you
that
want to do that one
become
first?
one zone or two separate zones?
Is it one zone or two separate zones?
So
It's all part of the tertiary education zone, but because of the fact that it's in effectively 3 chunks of land now, I've split up the definition of site. It's a bit complicated, but there was an issue with whether the Dovedale site was part of the overall site. For the purposes of activities, I think it is, because we're talking about has the UC land as a whole. For the purposes of things like parking requirements, we're looking at each block separately, so it's a little bit different to the norm.
So in terms of Dovedale, which tends to operate quite differently than the rest of the block, but they're using it as their decanting area, so there's quite mass student location there at the moment. We're necessitating a new crossing. What are the parking requirements on that site? Are they the same as the sort of 1 to 20 on the, or whatever it was, on the main site?
I'm really not the expert on parking. That's under the transport chapter. I think they are the same pretty much. I guess one of the concerns about parking on Dovedale is to do with the fact that the university actually charges for a lot of their parking, so that's probably the reason that they get a lot of spillover onto adjoining streets.
So in what way does the new district plan address the issues that the university has created in that neighbourhood?
Are you talking parking issues, or are we talking other issues?
Parking issues for a start, and then what's allowed to be developed on the Dovedale campus?
I can't really answer the parking question. That will have to be David Falconer. Has he been on?
Yes, he has, but we can bring him back.
Yeah. With regard to the activities on the site, I don't really think that it's appropriate for us to specify which activities can happen there. I think that that's pretty much up to the university, but what I have done is try to look at the built standards so that we are sure that we can try and mitigate the effects on neighbours of the buildings. It's in terms of things like stepping back heights from the boundaries, etc. I think it's a bit harder to actually control, as I said, what the university chooses to do there. I referred you, I think, in the earlier discussion to the fact that they're now not proposing to put all of the hostel accommodation, proposed hostel accommodation for the future on that site. Some of it's going to be over at Montana Ave, so that'll probably reduce the total scale on the Dovedale site, but they're still looking at putting a couple of quite large blocks of hostels on the Dovedale site, but slightly further in and towards the centre of the site rather than on the corners.
But are we just relying upon the good planning skills of the university and not providing any guidelines?
No, I think that as for the other education sites, we're interested in the amenity of the neighbours, and we have setbacks and we have height controls and stepping back of heights, as I was saying. I've also put in another rule about sort of alcohol being supplied, or not actually in this case, not being supplied at all on that site between the hours of 11 and 7. There's a sort of a complementary rule in the general rules and procedures chapter about within 75 metres of residential zones. So that's kind of almost as far as I think that I can go. I just don't feel that I can address all of those issues. Some of them are behavioural issues.
Well, some of them are university behavioural issues as well. So how do we know? So have you put a setback from the street in terms of large potential developments that we faced like 18 months ago or a year ago when they wanted to put a very large hostel right up on Solway Ave?
Yeah, we've got a 10-metre setback from the street.
10 metre.
Also, because of the stepping up of heights, I've forgotten the figures, I have to look it up. You can only have, like, effectively, I think it's, might be 12 metres sort of behind that, and then further in you can go up to 16, if I remember correctly. So it's trying to push the sort of the bulkier buildings further in. potentially, so, yeah, but I'm not aware that there is actually a proposal to put a building on that corner anymore.
No. I know there's not this week, but I'm just trying to make sure that this lasts a wee bit longer than next week.
Sure. I am not sure that I am convinced that the threat to residents is quite as bad as they might consider it to be, and that might or could justify stronger controls than elsewhere. We already have situations with the university and adjoining neighbours which are kind of effectively the same. At least these residents do have the road in between. Yeah, it's a difficult one.
I don't think that the road is their major amenity in that area.
No, I agree with what you're saying. I do take my dog walking there. It is a high amenity site, but short of actually putting it into some sort of open space zone, it's quite difficult, protecting individual areas of trees.
I understand the problem, but so the university's plans have changed at least 4 times since I've been involved in the council side of it, and what I'm trying to get is some sort of reasonable restriction, because obviously the 6 or 8 story building immediately facing a single story residential
it's
street.
not going to be 6 or 8 stories. The
So
height
12 metres is what?
Well, it would potentially be about 3 stories.
3 stories, within
so-
10 metres. Could we potentially set that back slightly more? Or do we break every other planning rule?
Sure, we could. They did have I have to say, a 15-metre setback in the operative city plan. I thought that was kind of a little bit out of line with the rest of the setbacks for all of the schools and other tertiary institutions. So at this stage I've got 10 in the redrafted.
You've actually made it more liberal.
In that regard, but actually more restrictive with regard to the heights.
Okay, so could we find a happy medium that we leave it back at 15 and leave it at the height that you're suggesting?
Well, that would be, as a package, more restrictive than the current setup,
I understand
and doesn't provide any more flexibility for them. At the moment, they're
I'm not keen that we do.
yeah. At the moment, they're pushing their coverage on that site because in the tertiary education zone, the definition of coverage included impervious surfaces, and they're kind of right up against it. So I thought it was important to give them a little bit of flexibility in terms of shifting buildings around, within all of their sites.
All right, so there's effectively a suggestion or an amendment from Vicky. Is there any sort of support around the table for that, or wanting to, obviously from Vicky, but does anyone else feel the same sort of way? So Yanni as well. All right.
Can I just respond to the impervious surfaces? There is a huge area of that Dovedale campus, especially along Solway Ave, it is just asphalted.
That's right.
And is not even used for car parks because they actually, apart from charging, don't provide any means of paying for their car parks either. So you drive in there and then you actually have to go to the cafe to get your ticket, to come back and put it on your car, before you go and have your cup of coffee. So, I mean, they have some really unusual practices, and that takes up a lot of the bulk of their area. They also have some very large areas of single-storey buildings, some of which are a legacy from the Waimarie County, in that block that Unlimited is currently occupying, that are very, very old prefabs. And talk about sweating the equity in those, they have, and that's fine. But looking at this is the rest of Solway Ave. It's very low density, usually single story on the other side of the road, and the residents have been incredibly concerned about the possibility of very high buildings immediately shading them, as opposed to what is a kind of a green campus area there at the moment.
Yeah, well, they already had a 20-metre maximum height in the operative plan, and they don't actually have very many buildings that are that high. I think probably none of them. The most that I recall looking at was about 4 stories, and so I haven't increased that at all. As I said, I've decreased it.
I'm fine with that towards the middle of the campus, just on the edge of that campus, along Solway and probably Parkstone. Just that we actually step that back, and if we can keep it at the 15, I think that's livable without
I think some of the difficulty at the moment, as you know, is the temporary consents, the blocks there.
No, I'm not even worried about those. Those will go away eventually.
For sure.
It's just leaving a legacy of what was a very nice green area. And I appreciate the university has got a whole lot of imperatives and they're trying to do the best they can in very tough circumstances. But just I think if we take it closer to the road rather than leaving it where it was, I like your idea of height being sort of having to step back. I just think if we can leave that at 15 metres rather than 10, rather
Yeah,
than bring
I
it
guess
closer.
if we do that, as I said, we're being more restrictive overall.
But it's actually not in conflict with their current plans for the site.
Well, it may be if they want to put their coverage beyond the current, I think it's 40%.
All right. I just feel that we're going in circles a wee bit here. I heard the staff response. They really can't defend it. You've got a view though, which is different to that. It's effectively an amendment that you're proposing, which is that you go slightly lower, 15 metres, was it? Or sorry,
Well, just the setback is 15.
setback is 15, but the height remains the
Current
same.
setback is 15.
So you
we're
effectively
actually
want to
going
keep
closer to
the
road.
operative plan is really what the amendment
Or
is.
that component of
For
the
that
operative
component.
plan. Yeah.
Okay, so should we test that? Okay, so we'll put that to a vote. All those in favour of the amendment say aye. Oh, sorry, totally wrong process there. Jimmy seconds that. So we've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Put that to a division if that's okay.
Oh, it's carried.
Was it? Mate,
It was. So you need to make that
was
amendment.
it? Put your hand up if you were a no. I was a no. Looks about even to me. Yeah, sure, all right. Okay, so that's carried. All right, so that's carried. That now becomes the substantive, which is effectively that component, which is the operative
Could you please
plan.
just make it 15 metres, not what's in the operative plan?
So 15 metres.
Yes, that the setback be changed from 10 to 15 metres
Right.
from Solway Ave.
Okay, so we'll continue on with questions there. I think Jimmy has a question and also Yanni has a question. I need to leave now, so Jimmy is now chairing, and over to you to ask yourself a question.
I have one question, except the setback, the Vicky, she particularly concerned the the campus. I'm also concerned whether have another kind of for instance, like noise, have any setting up any kind of criteria, because the Davao area mainly for the student accommodation, etc., rather than for the nurturing.
So is your question, are there noise rules? There are noise controls in the general rules chapter, I think it's chapter 6, that cover receipt of noise in the residential zones, so those apply.
So we've been through that chapter this morning? Yes. Yeah.
Yes, so the fellow council have any more questions? Yanni, please.
Okay, so just going to the university site, I see that on the map, it would appear that you've taken zoning over Montana Ave. My understanding was that some of that was residential.
It's a line-up of houses, but all of them bar one are actually owned by the university.
Right, but it is residential
Yep.
currently. So is there any other education land that that's currently residential that you're rezoning education?
A couple of houses, one on the sort of just a bit back from Kirkwood Ave that the university own. Yeah, that's the main area.
What about
Generally-
the other schools and stuff, like some of the private schools?
There are some schools that have bought houses adjoining to expand onto adjoining residential land, and in many cases that's happened. It's a continuation of trends anyway. That's already happened in the past, and so where the school has, for example, knocked down the house and made, put a building across several titles, which included a title that it was originally as a residential title, that is now rezoned to school zone because it is effectively being used as part of a school site.
But is
So
it-
the questions that you're asking now relate to the special purpose school zones
Yeah.
rather than the university. Are there any more questions on the university, I guess?
Oh, okay, well, I guess I can't see the logic in rezoning that, even if they own it, it's residential and we need housing in the city. So they've got heaps of space on the campus to build stuff.
Well, they don't actually have heaps of space from their, my discussions with them. They're saying that they're starting to have issues and, you know, they want to keep the temporary consents along Kirkwood Ave and things like that because they'll be losing various little pods eventually and, you know, they're juggling all the time. So I think they don't actually have heaps of space given that they want to keep that sort of park-like setting and we want them to keep that as well.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't support that, but just the Polytech, you've got permitted activities to 90% on the Madras Street site. Is that what's currently in the operative plan, or is that?
Yeah, that's on the operative plan at the moment. I haven't been able to get accurate figures for their current coverage, but it's probably nowhere near that.
And what's the requirement for parking, car parking?
At the Polytech?
Yeah.
CPIT, they don't have a requirement as a result of the Central City Recovery Plan.
Right. So, and we can't address that because we're not doing Central City today. So that one should be taken out. And we do it as part of Central City.
That's a separate question, really. I mean, it has to do with the Christchurch Central Recovery Plan.
Oh no, but I mean even the special purpose zone for the Polytech, because it's in the Central City, we can't do it today.
I haven't covered parking at all in these specific purposes zones because it's covered in Chapter
There's
7.
parking, but recession, amenity.
What he's saying is the Central City chapter is a standalone chapter, so the specific purpose zone should go in the Central City chapter and shouldn't be signed off today. Is
Oh,
what he's
okay.
saying.
Yeah, it does. The Central City Tertiary Education sites, which is just the CPIT site, Madras Street, is in the Central City chapter.
Okay, so when it comes back, I won't waste any more time today around these school sites that are not
Tertiary.
that are in the even the tertiary ones, but even the school.
Yeah.
There's Central City schools as well.
So you're quite right.
They'll come
but
back
The
as part of
special
that.
purpose, the specific purpose zone should be split between what's in the city centre and what's in the rest of the zone. That's correct. It should be split.
Yeah, at the moment there was a little bit of duplication in some of those documents, and it should be all in one.
So this chapter will now be split. The SPZ tertiary education and the SPZ schools. For the parts that need to go into the Central City Centre will go in their chapter.
Yeah.
And the other parts will go out as part of the stage 2. That's correct.
And the final question from me on this one is, like Wolfston School, for example, you haven't encroached any school zones into parks or reserves or...
No, because
QE2.
they don't own it. I mean, essentially the school zones are defined by the ownership, like by Ministry of Education or whatever.
Right. So we've only got zones being rezoned where they own it and they've had a traditional use of education.
Or else that, you know, they are intending to use that for school buildings or whatever.
Oh, okay. Can I get a list? Like, can you just highlight which ones they're intending to use?
They being the Ministry of Education or?
Yeah.
No, the Ministry of Education's not normally the one that's expanding. It's usually the private schools.
Right. That's my concern, is that schools are buying up residential property and creating all sorts of traffic and amenity issues for local neighbourhoods.
Not necessarily so, because often, you know, it's just part of the overall site. It doesn't add anything to traffic.
Right. I think cathedral people around the inner city would have a different view, but I don't know if there's any others outside of the central city that are in that situation.
Well, the ones that I'm aware of, they've already been expanding over time, and all I'm doing is recognising the fact that they've already expanded. It's kind of like a post situation. But yeah, as I said, it depends on what they're doing with that land, because if they're building some great big, I don't know, performance centre or something like that, it probably may or may not have an effect on parking or traffic. That could, but if it's just normal teaching space, it's probably kind of just more specialised spaces or, you know, same number of pupils. So it depends.
Thanks.
Okay, so Yanni, you would like to amendment this, or
No, it's fine, because the Central City stuff will come back and the Polytech will be in the Central
That's right,
City.
but we have to make a
Yes.
resolution to say that under the SPZ tertiary education zone, that those areas that are located within the Central City go in the Central City chapter, and similarly under the schools.
Okay.
And then, you're quite right, then they come back to you as part of that chapter.
Thank you. So are there any more questions? No, we carry. The next one?
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ivan's going to talk to you about the waste management specific purpose zone, Sticks Mill, and that's it?
Wigram, is it?
No,
done
Wigram's been done.
Okay. Well, the Sticks Mill zone is it's a specific purpose zone which really reflects the transfer station out of Sticks Mill Road. The rules there haven't changed. It's basically just been carried over from the operative plan to ensure that that facility can continue to operate. So I'm more than happy just to recommend that to the Minister as it is. There's no changes proposed.
Okay, thank you. So questions? Yeah.
Thanks.
Pauline, yeah.
Thanks, Mr Chair. So there's been no registered complaints or anything about that as far as I know?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? No, so Pauline would like to move? Or how about Ali, you'd like to second? Okay, all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? No, carried. Okay. Next one. Okay.
On your agenda, councillors, there is the waste management specific purpose zone. Oh. Sorry. Yeah, specific the waste reference to waste management there. That's the Burwood landfill site. Now, remember this morning when we were talking about the general city rules, we had a reference to landfill, which we took out. So what's happening is that Burwood landfill is becoming a park, and that because the landfill actually the consent runs out in 2016 under the earthquake legislation, and it will become a park. So the resolution for that will be probably part of the open space resolution, because it's going to be a community open space community park.
So sorry, now can I change the resolution, please, instead of what's there under 1, to say that the specific purpose zone has been deleted? Has been deleted, and the Burwood landfill area will be included in the open space chapter.
So are there any more
It's
questions?
not a special purpose zone anymore,
No,
is
I
what
know
we're saying.
No, Pauline. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be either conjunction. That's right.
Okay, are there more questions regarding to this issue? No? So, Colleen, you like to move? Yeah. How about Ray? Second? Okay, so all those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Oh, carried. Okay. Next item.
Cemeteries?
Cemeteries, it's sorry. Oh, really?
The specific purpose cemetery zone, I've had 3 changes since this chapter has been, or this topic has been to you. First is the use of the term passive recreational activities. In one of the objectives, we mentioned that the cemeteries and crematoria would provide for passive recreational activities. There has been an issue with the definition of the passive recreational activities, where some of those activities are not appropriate for the cemetery. So we've changed it to the term passive cemetery activities. So that was one change. And then the second one, it's on the table where I have a list of all the cemeteries within the city and Banks Peninsula. So I've removed the Barbados Cemetery, which will now go into the Central City chapter. And also the boundary of the Littleton Catholic and Public Cemetery has been extended because they have recently, or our Green Space Assets Network team have recently acquired the land adjacent to it. So it's just those changes, and any proposed amendments would fall under the general blanket amendments.
Have any other questions? So, yes, Ali.
Well,
Is it on a map?
it's on the planning map. Hang on, I've got here the planning map number. Littleton, yep. It's planning map number 52.
52.
We got the planning maps. Specific purpose cemetery. Oh, it's blocked out, but it's the top parcel. There's that's just an addition there.
Purple in
Purple,
the
SPC, purple.
right-hand lower
Right-hand.
corner.
Yeah. The extreme right purple SPC. That's the Littleton Catholic and Public Cemetery. Yep.
Also, the Vicky would like to move. Yeah. How about Andrew? Would like to move? Okay. And then Paul, you like to second? Okay. Thank you. The Andrew move and Paul second. All those in favor say aye. Against? Abstention? Carry. So next item.
All right, now we have the specific purpose port zone, and there might be related questions here with the recovery plan. Debbie is your person on both of those topics.
Good afternoon. So just jumping straight into it. So the purpose of the specific purpose Littleton Port Zone is, of course, to provide for operational port activities with a key focus on recovery, which has been the lens that has been used to develop this chapter. So a number of changes to the rules have been made since the previous version you saw in January. These changes have really reflected councillor feedback as well as ongoing discussions with ECAN as part of aligning the district plan provisions with the development of the port recovery plan. So the key changes include some clarification about the appropriate limits and scale thresholds that apply to retail and office activity in the proposed Dampier Bay area. So this was the area of the port where eventually they will no longer require for port operational activities as they move to the east, and that frees up the area for improved public access and a range of activities associated with that. So those thresholds are now reflected within the provisions before you. Just in response to questions in January, we've included a limitation on the height of container stacks along Norwich Quay. So previously they were unlimited in their height, which reflected the rest of the port operational area. So in response to those concerns raised, we've imposed a height limit of 15 metres. So this is designed to match the height limit of buildings along that frontage. So container stacks to go no higher than 15 metres along that frontage. One of the other key changes, and this really is in response to the fact that there is a recovery plan process going on, and there's a slightly different approach with the port zone in that we've now included provisions relating to transport and hazardous substances within the port zone, as opposed to relying on other chapters, the main chapters within which they sit for the rest of the plan. And the reason being is just in terms of getting caught up in the recovery plan, district plan process. So we've included them within the chapter. Now, since the chapters were finalised for the today's agenda, the Littleton Port Recovery Plan Working Party had a meeting yesterday, and it was their opportunity to have a look through these plan provisions before today. And as a result of discussions and concerns raised at that meeting, I've proposed some amendments to take account of those concerns, and they're contained in the resolutions before you. So just going through them, there was some discussion around whether or not the recovery plan was going to determine the outcome of where the passenger ferry terminal is to be located, whether it's in its existing location or a new location in Dampier Bay. So in order to reflect or to not predetermine any outcome, I've proposed an amendment to a policy that deals with the management areas and activities, and the proposal is to delete any reference to that passenger ferry terminal, so that it's kind of taken out of the policy framework context that sits in the district plan. It will still be provided for, and the ability to provide for it is really what we're trying to cover off in the zone. There were also some other references just to ensuring that any access, whether it be pedestrian, cycling or vehicle, is also direct in between the town centre and Dampier Bay in particular. So where those references have occurred, namely in policy relating to access and movement networks, that's part B of point 2 up there, and also it occurs in a matter of discretion. So I've proposed some amendments to take account of those concerns that were raised yesterday. And then the fourth resolution is just consequential amendments required to section 32. There was a few gaps that have occurred, so I intend to plug those gaps.
Okay, thank you. Regarding to a staff proposed amendment, are there any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
Vicky, please.
Sorry,
You're talking about in relation to the hazards chapter and rockfall hazard? Yes, correct. It does, yes.
but we have existing
Yeah, I was just going to say that's currently a matter before the hearings panel.
Yeah.
With the hazards chapter.
You might
already been
recall
dealt
that the
with.
hearing's starting on the 2nd of March, so we really can't discuss that here.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, so it's already there and we haven't done
To undermine that.
No. So that line stands. The zone is providing for activities, and the hazards chapter will come on top of that, subject to.
As a chapter has the
decisions.
overlay that says where the prohibited line is.
Is there any other reason?
Councillor Turner may wish to add to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
please.
If I may, thank you. This is one of the things that will land as a result of the recovery plan, and there's a conversation very much still going on with ECAN around the position of the ferry terminal. The port view is that it should land at Dampier Bay. The community view is that it should stay where it is. There was a working party that came up with a conclusion that the ferry terminal should stay where it was. There are some documents have been put together by the port, which we're currently sending reports back to the port on, which some of the information is dubious, is questionable, put it that way. It's a big conversation, and we thought it was better if this chapter didn't prejudge the outcome of that by making assumptions.
Okay, thank you. Yanni. Yeah.
Jack, who's on that port working party? Is there any external representatives?
No, it's consists of councillors, so Councillor Lonsdale, Turner and Chen, and community board members.
All right, so I'm just kind of wondering how, has the port, have they got any, have we consulted with them over what this zone is?
So just coming back to process, so just we are running under two different processes here. So we have our district plan review process, which is this item before you now, and the recovery plan process is also running concurrently, and that is run by ECAN. So as part of the development of the recovery plan, ECAN staff and myself have worked alongside to develop a set of district plan provisions that we will notify and that will be included in the recovery plan that ECAN notifies. Now, the basis of all this information was a requirement under the Minister's direction on the recovery plan that Littleton Port Company provide a package of information to ECAN so that ECAN can then develop the recovery plan. So we have used that as a basis to develop these provisions. So it was essentially LPC presented their view.
Yeah.
We've taken that and adapted it into a council ECAN view, and then that will then go out for submissions under both processes.
So is there anything that we would put in there that the port wouldn't be happy with, that we would actually do because it makes sense for the city?
Oh, there are a number of things in there that they're not particularly happy with, but there are reasons why we've done those things, like at Dampier Bay, in terms of restrictions or particular requirements around activity status to ensure that public access is provided in a certain way. There was some unease around some aspects of Sutton Quay, so we've included activity statuses to ensure that they provide, or at least go through a consent process to ensure that the relevant assessment of effects is undertaken. So there are some things that they won't be happy with, but they are done from an overarching strategic community perspective.
Thanks.
Okay, are there any more questions? So if not, Andrew, are you happy to move? So Vicky, you happy to second? Okay, so the Andrew move and the Vicky second. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? Carry. Next item.
And the last specific purpose zone is hospitals. And I have Jack Chester.
Hi. So the hospital zone, the hospital chapter really, the main drivers have been about sorting out the purpose of this zone. So what kind of facilities we anticipate in them. And also accepting that these sites are going to need to be intensified going forward. They can't keep expanding. So trying to give the hospital providers more flexibility about the type of buildings and the scale of them, whilst also dealing with some of the issues that we've had in terms of these hospital buildings being built right up next to residential boundaries and causing issues along there. So there's been there was originally about 24 sites within this zone, so we're taking that down to 9. So we're going to focus on just the larger hospitals. The idea being the other sites were actually more retirement villages with a on-site kind of medical side of it. And what we're proposing to do is rezone those as residential, in which case, when they're consented and looked at, they'll be better fitting to their context, which is residential areas. So going forward, we've tried to simplify the rules for the hospitals that we're keeping in this zone, and we've originally there was a lot of different site specifics for the sites. We've tried to group the hospitals, so we've got the ones that are in our suburban areas like Burwood and Hillmorton, the kind of more campus, greener hospitals. Then we've got the inner urban ones, and it'll be in the Central City chapter, but the main hospital site in the town as well. So what we've tried to do is get groups of rules, so it's a bit simpler when you're reading it to kind of understand the type of environment within each of these hospitals. So as a general rule, and a bit like we've sought to do in the tertiary one, is we've tried to say you can go higher. If you've got a site, you can build higher buildings, bigger buildings in the middle of the sites, but at the edges, next to the residential areas, we're going to seek setbacks and only smaller buildings. So that's been the general philosophy there. So in order to try and do that, we've also addressed the definitions. So the hospital definition kind of focused on the medical things originally. Now what we've done is it's more an activity-based definition, so it's clear about what you can do. So, you know, accepting hospitals need a bit of R&D, office, those kind of activities. And the healthcare definition, we're also proposing to amend in order that you can't build a retirement village under the healthcare definition. So it's just clarifying what we're seeking with those two things. I know Ivan brought this one to you first of all, but there weren't any big changes since that, but there are some amendments that we're seeking today, just to correct things up really. So the first one is the old definition was what you saw. The new definition obviously needs to go in there. And like I said, that's to reflect greater flexibility for the hospitals and to sort out that issue with retirement homes. The second correction is that there's been a wrong height rule inserted relating to internal boundaries. So instead of reading that, it should be read as 18 metres they can go build to, 16 metres from the
That's not
setback.
up there at the moment, so you might need to read that out.
Okay, yeah, I've got that. And the third correction, or shall I do that one now? I can come to you with the exact wording for that second one. Okay. Recommended that the rule...
Amendment.
A new amendment, please. Yeah.
Under the cross-referencing bullet point, isn't it? The height one?
No, I sent this to Sarah this morning. She said it was going to be updated. Yeah. Okay, and the third change is just to make some additions to the section 32, just to add in some of the rationale for some of these proposed rules packages.
So we just need to get that up. Apologies, there's been a miscommunication.
So during the staff typing the questions, are there any other questions? Or Tim, please.
I've got so many tonight. Highlights, but it's like, I'm on the end of the file and I opened it, go, yes, and it's all gone. So
Oh, can you remember any?
probably lucky. C, improve the quality of
Do you know where he is? Sorry, she's just trying to find out where you're relating.
Which one are you? Sorry.
In the section 32.
Oh, in the section 32.
Sorry, I haven't got that with me. Oh, thank you.
Oh, you got it? Oh, there's your hospital one.
Sorry. Say again, page... Yep.
So there's going to be a difference between, so now they know there's no confusion about what they are. Okay, so closing down at some
Yeah.
stage.
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
So also any future development of hospitals in the future, I mean, one of the
Yeah. That's right. So if the rezoning of this takes place and they're residential areas, the definition of a retirement home is about providing independent care and facilities for on-site residents.
Right.
So that will hopefully address that issue.
Okay, so apart from existing rights, but new ones would not, they would be covered in that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Are there any more questions? Oh, Yanni.
Again, I'll just assume that all the central city stuff will be deleted and put into the central city chapter
Yes, it
zone.
should be. You're quite correct.
So we need a resolution. RD4, page 31, comprehensive redevelopment or development of Princess Margaret for residential purposes.
That's right.
Why would that be in this area? Why wouldn't we just deal with that through our normal residential chapter? Like, why would we give them special treatment?
Yes, we thought about this one a lot. The idea was that, you know, they've confirmed to us that at the beginning of 2016 they want to sell that on for residential, and so this is really triggering that that's going to happen, and we'd expect that's why there's also a policy in there about what we'd like to see there, and accepting that yes, some form of residential on that site would work.
So, like, I'm not happy for that to be in this chapter. I don't think we need to create a special purpose hospital zone for a residential development. It doesn't seem very fair. I think what needs to happen is it needs to go through the normal residential consenting process. So,
Princess Margaret.
should I move a resolution that we delete it, or
Propose.
how do I deal with that?
Just one moment. When does it close down?
Well, they've in 2016 they've said that they'll decide.
You specify clearly. Yes.
Because it will probably limit the rights for the local neighbourhood to be notified. It'll probably limit a number of things that you might want to consider if you were doing a residential. It might make it easier to have some quite ghastly development. I mean, who knows? But that's why I can't see why you would. I can't see that you can justify being a special purpose hospital zone if it's intended to be residential.
That's the only thing. It's not notified.
Well, that's what I say.
I'm sorry? Sorry.
Yeah, so
Completely unfair. Yanni's concern was that residential, that it limits the capacity.
Right. No, I talked to you this early, didn't we, Ivan?
No, look, the 2 or 3 issues here. I'll deal with the design one first. It'll be a restricted discretionary activity, and it would depend on the effects, whether it'll be notified or not. So there's still a possibility it will be notified. The issue around design, it does trigger an urban design rule and a comprehensive development rule. So our planners are able to assess that consent in terms of a number of criteria that are listed in the assessment matters. The first question was you asked Jack, I think Councillor Johansson asked, why are we including in this chapter? Because although there's been speculation in the media, and I think one or two statements from the hospital board that they do intend to close Princess Margaret, we still do not know yet whether it's going to be fully closed. It could be partially closed. They might hold on to some of it. So what this rule does, it gives us some flexibility. It doesn't actually it doesn't corner it. So if we left it at a specific purpose and then didn't actually have an underlying zoning, then anything that the Canterbury Hospital Board did, if they did close Princess Margaret, all or part of it, it would then be a non-complying activity or require a plan change. And what this rule does, it enables the hospital board to close either some of it or partially some of it, and they've still got the flexibility to decide how they're going to configure the site. So it makes a lot smoother transition to any form of residential development, whether it's for the full site or part of the site. So it's really just a strategic way of keeping the options open so that whatever happens, it doesn't put the Canterbury Hospital Board through an unwieldy process but at the same time, safeguards, you know, enables our consent planners to assess it from an urban design perspective and decide whether or not to publicly notify it.
But it doesn't meet the objective of this policy. It's really clear. Healthcare providers are able to develop existing hospital facilities in an efficient and effective manner to provide for healthcare facilities and associated services. It doesn't even meet the objective. So I really struggle to see how it's in here. And I guess the other question I have is it a listed heritage building?
Princess Margaret? No.
It's not?
Yeah.
So you know, a number of people could want special treatment for things that might happen in the future, but I don't know if that's a very good way of planning a city.
So the style, to more answer.
Especially when the purpose,
any
it doesn't
question.
match the purpose.
The objective could be tweaked a little bit
Next
to
one.
cover that off if that's what the council wants to do.
But there is a policy there, though, about alternative use. You
You're
see
saying
that
it
one?
doesn't hang off the objective, is that the concern? Yeah. He's saying
That's
it doesn't
right,
hang off.
yes. The objective is the what we want to do, the sort of strategic direction, you might say. The policy is how we're going to do it.
Okay, Phil, please. Yeah.
Well, it just sounds like that might need some fine-tuning more, so where the objective includes perhaps this. I think Ivan's point about this being the need for a transition is really important. We've still got to look after sick people and elderly people at PMH and people with mental illness as part of the transition. My main question really was around this, and I'm not sure what page, I was reading it last night, but where there's new healthcare sort of facilities, like, is the section on parking going to cater sufficiently for them? Like, the DHB themselves have a large number of cars, and so do the staff. So I'm just wondering, have we got that sort of tied up?
I want to talk about parking.
9,000 staff.
Yeah.
Not all on one side.
Yeah. So all parking requirements are on the Phase 1 Transport chapter, and they are subject to submissions, and so they're going to the hearing in June. So that's when it will be considered further. But yes, we do have parking requirements in the Phase 1 chapter.
Is there any requirement around how they provide parking? Like, does it have to be free or can they charge for it?
No, we can't control whether they can charge for it or not. We can only control that they provide it. It's their economic right to do what they do with their land, which is so. What we are doing with a lot of those major developments is working with them through trying to work on travel plans and so forth. But we can't, through a regulatory framework like the district plan, say that they can't charge for.
Because it just seems, in terms of the adverse effects in the neighbourhood, when they do introduce charges like St George's, everyone just parks on the street in the local neighbourhood.
Yeah.
Adverse impact.
Yeah, but we charge for parking on our parking sites. We can't tell a private developer that they can't charge. It's outside the district plan.
Okay. And just when it comes back, Fort Health, that will be included in the Central City chapter?
No, we're not going to. That's already provided for through the Central City Recovery Plan zoning. It's in a zone that enables health facilities and things to go in, so it's already covered off there.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, turn, please. Okay.
Page 32, the Cashmere View Hospital.
Is this in the rules
This is
or
section 32.
This is the same, this is section 32, sorry.
Okay.
The second to last page, I think.
Okay.
Yep. So basically, the proposed zoning is residential, so
Yeah.
not near any key activity centres, so it's not justified for resource management.
No.
Residential.
This was sort of a working document here. So we wondered about putting residential medium density on the site, given the scale of the residential units and things on the block, but it's surrounded by residential suburban, so that's the best fit for the adjacent area.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the proposed zoning, yeah, when we change it from the hospital zone.
Okay, so regarding to hospital issue, are there any more questions? If no, Yanni, are you happy now regarding to start the answer? Or you still insist on have some amendment? No? Okay, that's good. So, Phil, are you happy to move?
I'll move this.
You? Oh, you move. You second? Okay. So, term the move and the Phil second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carry.
Thank you. I'd just like to move back to the cemetery specific purpose zone and add that same clause that the cemetery is located within this central city, within the city area, be located in the central city chapter. That's correct. That's good. So if you're happy with that, that resolution can stand as amended. Okay. And then there are just a couple of last general recommendations for that particular chapter, and they're really just to cover minor amendments. In fact, I think some of these are repeats, but it's good to have that there at the end.
Additional for chapter 21.
Yes, these are just general overall recommendations to allow for minor amendments and additions to the Section 32 report.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So, Glenn, are you happy to move? And Paul, are you second? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Against? Carry.
So we just have two more chapters and then definitions and maps to go. The two chapters are the biggest ones. I don't know if you would like to break for afternoon tea now and come back to do that.
Okay, yes. How
Does
about
that suit you?
10 minutes? 15, okay,
15
yeah.
minutes.
We'll break for 15 minutes. So please back to the council chamber. It's 3:05.
Thank you.
3:05.